In the last movie, we talked about the basic concepts that are behind pagination, and we talked about how we want to come up with two sets of information, a subset of records for the current page, and then information about how many total records there are. And in order to do that, we'll need to make use of some MySQL syntax, specifically limit, offset, and count. Now, limit is going to be the maximum number of records that should be returned by the query. So for example, if we have an SQL query that has a limit of 20, then it will return 20 records, even if there's 10,000. This corresponds to per page when we're doing pagination. It's how many records do we want to have returned in that subset of information for a page. So if we're looking at a page and we want to have 20 results, we'll limit it to 20. I think that's fairly straightforward. Offset, though, is a little more complicated. Offset is going to be the records that should be skipped before SQL starts returning records to us. The reason why we need an offset is so that we don't always get the same records over and over again. If we have limit 20, it'll only give us 20 records, but we don't always want the first 20 records. Sometimes we want the second 20 records. We want to skip over the first 20 and then start with record 21 through 40. That's what offset allows us to do. The way we can determine offset is by a calculation. We take per page times the current page that we're on minus 1. And that will tell us what the offset ought to be. If the reasoning behind that math isn't totally clear to you, let's look at some examples to make it clearer. Say, for example, that we have per page equals to 10. So it'll be 10 items per page. Once again, our calculation for offset is per page, which is 10, times the current page minus 1. If the current page is 1, that calculation works out so that offset is 0. And that would mean that records 1 through 10 would be returned to us. If we're on page 2, though, the offset would calculate out to be 10, and that would mean that records 11 through 20 would be returned to us, because it would skip the first 10 records. It would offset by those 10. And that makes sense. And we can see then, as we look down the column of records, how we get each page of records, 10 at a time. So the SQL syntax that we're going to use to do that in a select statement is going to be select all from photographs, limit, and then whatever variable we have for how many per page, and then offset, which will be whatever offset we want to use. Now, count is pretty straightforward. We just want to get a count of how many records are in the database. The SQL syntax that we're going to use for that is simply going to be select, count, and then parentheses around the asterisks. That's the asterisk that we were using here in this statement. It's to say get all fields. We're going to put count around that. So we're going to say select all, count everything that comes back from photographs. And that will provide us with a count. It'll tell us how many entries there are in the photograph table. In the next movie, let's go back to PHP and see how we can find the pagination variables we're going to need so that we can execute these SQL statements.